So many clicking sounds.
I just tried to click us on the embedded version of this, and it says it doesn't exactly show we're coming up live right now. So not sure if we're actually on air yet. But
It says live in the top right corner.
okay, well.
It's riveting television.
Want to make one new message. Okay, never mind. Oh, maybe that's not. Is that showing up? I thought that might show up for readers.
No, I think that's our group chat.
Ah, okay.
For Georgia.
Well, like I just don't know if people are able to watch this. All right, I guess I'll go first for my. Oh, maybe that's not. Is that showing up? I thought that showed for readers.
No, I think that's our group chat.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
For Georgia.
I guess for the Michigan State guys, just what have you heard about Austin that you're are particularly interested in kind of seeing in person? I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about the crowd noise and all that stuff. Is there anything you guys are most interested in?
Yeah, I'm interested in the environment at Austin Stadium. You know, it only holds, what, 57,000 people, and yet people often think that there's 110,000 people in there because of the size and the aggressiveness of the crowd. So I'll be interested to see if they can really create that much noise, more noise than Michigan does with 110,000 or Ohio State with 100,000, and see if they actually have an effect on Michigan State on Saturday.
Yeah. I guess for the Michigan State guys, what have you heard about Austin that you are particularly interested in kind of seeing in person? Is the audio like circling through quite a bit about the crowd noise and all that stuff? Is there anything you guys are most interested in?
Yeah, I'm interested in the environment at Austin Stadium. You know, it only holds, what, 57,000 people, and yet people often think that 110,000 people in there because of the size and the aggressiveness.
Seems to be better now.
I think it's because I had the live feed open in a separate tab.
Oh, way to go, Andrew.
Yeah. I know.
I think you screwed it up, Andrew. That's all right.
Well, I'll tell you that.
All right. For you Oregon guys, you guys asked the first question. My question, you've heard so many defenses come to Oregon and have so many different plans for how they're going to stop or slow down the Ducks, and it seems like nobody really has. What are you expecting from Michigan State, or do they, or how do they look different than maybe some of the defenses the Ducks have seen over the years?
I guess that they always talk about the Stanford comparison, and this week, like everybody from Helfrich to Scott Frost, and even like Matt Lubick, the wide receivers coach, they were saying, yeah, there's a comparison, I suppose, but it's only because they're both really physical teams. It's not because they necessarily run the same schematic formation. And so that's the thing I'm interested in seeing is like their Michigan State is apparently so basic in what they do. They only run that 4-3 kind of that same look every time. If they can kind of morph out of it. I'm interested to see how that kind of takes shape and if that can confuse Oregon at all. Because I think the general thing for Oregon is like we're going to throw everything we can at you to stop you. We're going to show you multiple fronts, multiple secondaries. Whereas Michigan State is like, no, we're going to do the opposite. Let's just do our one thing. We'll do it well. So I'm interested in that a lot.
How about you, Tyson?
I'm kind of really interested in just how those corners match up on Oregon's receivers. I know we were both looking last week to see who is going to kind of separate from the pack a little bit out wide for Oregon because, I think their top receiver from last year returning has 18 catches or so, and it was kind of mixed. But you got a couple of kind of physical guys out there with like Dwayne Stanford. He's 6'5" or so, and that's what I was going to ask you is just like how much of this kind of one-on-one press matchup do these Michigan State corners actually present or throw out there during these games?
It's kind of difficult to explain. They do play one-on-one press, but they also do kind of a zone. They get help out from their safeties. It's difficult to explain because they want it to be confusing. That's basically their game plan. They want you to think that they're pressing, but there's more help there than you think. So the simple answer to say is, yeah, they do press, but it is slightly more complicated. And Mike, you know a thing or two about that. You wrote quite a bit about that in preseason.
Yeah, when we talk about the simplicity of the Michigan State defense and the 4-3 base that they play out of, the reason it's so successful is that they're very versatile out of it. Everything looks the same until the ball is snapped, and that's where combo coverage come in. That's where the blitzes from hell come from all over the place. They're known for their double-A gap blitz up the middle, but they'll bring corners, they'll bring safeties, they'll zone. I think typically they're going to zone blitz in this game because they're worried about Oregon being able to get rid of the ball so quickly out into the flats. They're one of those three-handed monster running backs. But it sounds simple, but it's really not. It's a simple look, but they can do a lot of different things out of it. And another reason it's successful is that they don't have to bring in different personnel packages to combat different situations. They do have a nickel on the third down package, but that's about it. Part you're going to see those outside linebackers attempting to cover those talented Oregon slot receivers or the running backs. That's kind of where this we won or lost.
They'll bring safety.
Getting a little more feedback.
Yeah.
What's the temperature out there right now? Because a lot of people are talking about how it's going to be hot here at Autzen, but I imagine Michigan in the middle of September is pretty warm as well.
Well, we're actually in Oregon right now.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No, it was getting warmer there, but it wasn't this hot. It was like it had gotten into low 80s, mid 80s with a little bit of humidity, so they had a little bit of heat. And also, the Michigan State coaching staff brought them in the indoor facility and cranked the heat up on them. I know Tuesday they went like 45 minutes long in their practice, and they had been running in the indoor facility in the heat. I don't think that's going to be a big problem for Michigan State's defense, but where I wonder if it'll affect them is on Michigan State's offensive line. They're not as deep as they've been the last couple years, and if they want to stay on the field and keep Oregon's offense off the field, they're going to need to have some sustained drives and play some ball control, and I wonder how that offensive line is going to hold up in the heat with the lack of depth.
Yeah.
Another thing Michigan State's coaching staff pointed out was just that the heat is different. It's very humid heat out in Michigan, and that's where they've been practicing all through August. You guys know better than me, but they make it sound like it's a little bit drier out here. I'm not sure how much a difference that'll make when it's still 95 degrees outside. But they do. I think they do feel like they're conditioned for it to the point where it's not going to – I don't think they feel like it's going to be much more of a disadvantage for them than it is for Oregon's players.
Yeah. We got that nice dry heat out here.
That's what I've heard.
How's the pool looking, Kyle? Are you up by the pool right now, Kyle? Did you have to move out there?
Yeah, moved away from Mike. They got a nice little patio out here. No pool, though. I'll have to look around for one.
Okay. Is there it looks like just from looking briefly at Shalik Calhoun that he moves from left to right side. He kind of plays both ends. Is that something that he still does? The film I saw was from last year during the Michigan game in the Rose Bowl where he would go after the left tackle, then he'd go after the right side. Does he stay, or does he just kind of have the ability to freelance?
Oh, no, I think if he's moved around, it's because Pat Narduzzi wants him to. Although, Shalik really hasn't done a lot over the last 3 or 4 games. Early last season, he really made his money with some defensive touchdowns in the first 3 games. The last game against Jacksonville State, he was going up against a little smaller, lighter tackle and didn't seem to be as effective as far as disrupting the quarterback. And I wonder how effective he'll be going up against Fisher this weekend. I mean, that's a big matchup, but I wouldn't discount other defensive ends that Michigan State has. Marcus Rush was a freshman All-American. He's got about 41 starts on the other side. He's pretty good. And they got a redshirt freshman named Demetrius Cooper that's just been an absolute terror through spring drills and even into that first game, number 98. So they've got more than one guy that can hurt you. I know Shalik gets all the credit and all the praise, and he's a talented guy that's a first-round projection. But they've got some other defensive ends that are very effective as well.
I think that's one of the kind of matchups I'm looking forward to seeing is just how with an Oregon tackle Tyler Johnstone went down in the preseason, and you got his backup who's actually moved over to the right side, Andre, forgive me here, Uretagoyena, and they've talked like his biggest thing like the whole season. It's not the fact that he's not skilled; it's just kind of a confidence issue, and going up against his Michigan State line, I think that's you'll be able to tell really quick if he's been able to find that or not.
Yeah. I had a question for the Oregon guys. I feel like nationally, and people who are outside of Oregon focus a lot on the pass attack with the spread with Oregon. But you look at their numbers, and they've really been a very, very good rushing team the last couple of years. And I wonder if you guys feel like that's something that people don't look at, or if it's something that's overlooked, and kind of how important that is to their offensive attack.
It's so important. I mean, that was kind of the thing that the Chip Kelly teams were so good at was they made you think they were going to spread you out and kind of throw the ball, and but they would just pound it up the middle, with the read option and whatnot. That's the bread and butter is a running offense. I think last year during victories, they rushed for about like almost 300 yards a game, and then when they had their troubles, it was about 140 yards a game. It was really went downhill. And that's for a number of factors, but the point remains that they're good when they run the ball really well and run the ball a lot. Last year in the season opener, they had 500 yards of rushing against Nicholls State in 2013. We didn't see that last weekend, but they have the ability, you have to think, because they do have a pretty good offensive line, and then they have those 3 running backs, plus basically a 4th running back in Marcus Mariota, who, pretty excellent himself, ran for about 700 yards last year. So they want to push you around, kind of that smash mouth team, but disguise it within a spread offense that looks like it could hurt you in many other ways.
Well, wasn't last season like the first year that they hadn't rushed for 3,000 yards as a team in maybe like 3 or 4 years?
First time, I don't think they had rushed for 4,000 yards. I think they'd cracked 4,000 yards a couple.
That was the number I was talking about. So, I mean, yeah, that rushing attack has been pretty prevalent over the last, 4 or 5 years.
Looks like we've got an MSU question from a reader here. Bob Middleton wants to know if Michigan State fans are nervous. If there's anything that makes them nervous right now, I think might be the thought that if they lose this game, they might not be able to get into that 14 playoff. I know that's looking down the road quite a bit, but I think a lot of people feel like with the perceived strength of the Big Ten, lack of strength, as it were, with Ohio State losing their starting quarterback, I think the worry is that if you don't perform well out here, that could pretty much be it as far as that 14 playoff. A lot of things would still have to play out in terms of that. But to me, among Michigan State fans, that'd probably be the thing they're most worried about.
Yeah, in terms of the outlook of the game, for sure, Kyle. It's tough to draw that card, and it's tough to hear national analysts say, well, if Michigan State doesn't win this game, then the Big Ten's not any good. I'd say, what about the other 36 games at Autzen Stadium since 2009, of which Oregon's won 34? Were all those teams terrible too? What about Oregon beating its first 8 opponents last year by an average of 38.5 points? before Marcus Mariota got hurt. But that's where it's at for the Big Ten. I mean, this is the kind of game that Michigan State's got to win to help prop up the conference. We thought last week that maybe Wisconsin would get that sort of signature win against LSU, and they allowed a fourth quarter lead to get away. You look at the SEC this week, and I don't really see them playing anybody that's worth a darn. I know that Alabama struggled with a pretty mediocre West Virginia team, and even the defending national champ Florida State had trouble against the Oklahoma State team that lost most of its team from a year ago. So, to me, this conference power stuff is a little overrated at this stage of the game. I think you got to judge it year by year and even team by team. I do all that said, I do think there's ramifications. I do think Michigan State and the Big Ten are on the clock, and they've got to show well against the Oregon Ducks, or a lot of people are going to be ready to write the Big Ten off this year.
I know you guys have written a little bit about just the momentum this program has. I think 11 straight wins. What's just kind of the vibe around there after, they scheduled this game against Oregon several years ago, wanting to be at this spot where they're going to be able to compete with them at this point. Just do they feel like they've kind of arrived at that point? And is this, like you said, is this going to be kind of a statement game for them?
Well, I think, I'll let Kyle answer this in a second. I think they want it to be a statement game. I mean, playing good non-conference teams is nothing new to Michigan State. I mean, they just got done, beating Boise a couple of years ago. Of course, we all know that's a team Oregon wasn't able to beat. They've played Notre Dame and homes for years and years. They had Alabama on the schedule for 16 and 17, believe it or not. Alabama begged out of it. Alabama did not want to come to Spartan Stadium, and so they basically told Michigan State that they would play Michigan State in Tuscaloosa, but they wanted that second game to be at a neutral site. So much for SEC power and Nick Saban. But yeah, they scheduled Oregon at the time because they did feel like they'd be able to compete on a national level, and the Oregon Ducks, as we know, are the winningest Power 5 conference in the country, Power 5 conference team since 1997. It's a signature program from a Pac-12 league that I think gets a lot of national respect. It may not be considered the best in the country, but it's always considered one of the top 2 or 3. And this is why Michigan State scheduled this game. You're right, is they do want to show that they're ready to be on this type of stage.
Yeah, it's interesting. They did win the Rose Bowl last year, obviously, but they started the season, they were coming off a pretty poor 7-win season before that, so they really weren't on the national radar, and it really wasn't until the end of the year when everybody figured out, hey, Michigan State's really for real. So the difference is this year is everybody knows that from the start. Their preseason ranking, and I think that's why this game is so important, is because they're starting the season where they were. And if you start the season at the top, then obviously you can be in that national championship game picture at the end of the year. So I think that's what makes this more important than last year.
Have they acknowledged that this is a big game? Because I know yesterday when I was talking to some of Oregon's coaches, asking them, do they feel like they, as a Mark Helfrich staff, this is going into their 14th or 15th game, do they feel like they kind of need a signature big win? Because they lost to Stanford last year, they lost to Arizona, and they didn't really appreciate that question too much, saying that every game was a big game last year. But how's Michigan State react to sort of this sort of hype?
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think it's a huge game. I think it's a put-up or a shut-up game. Michigan State, kind of like Kyle said, snuck up on everyone. They weren't even ranked until the 10th week of the season last year. They pounded Michigan pretty good. They slid by Purdue in an ugly game, got by Minnesota, and then they really shocked Ohio State, then number 2. I think at the time State was number 7. I think they jumped up to number 4, I want to say, in the rankings. Just missed out on that spot in the national championship game. I think Auburn kind of aced them out. Auburn was viewed as the better one-win team. You can make an argument about that. Auburn won, 3 games, I think, on the last play. I think they beat a really bad Washington State team by maybe 6 or 7 points. I think they lost to LSU by 2 touchdowns. State's only loss was on the road to Notre Dame, controversial, 5 pass interference penalties. Beat every Big Ten team by double digits. First time in history anybody had done that over a 9-game season. State really had an argument to be in that game. But as Kyle said, because they started so low in the rankings, they weren't able to get themselves in position. We saw that happen with an Auburn team, I believe, in 2005 when there were 3 undefeated teams. Now fast forward to this year. Michigan State enters this game number 7. I venture to say they're in control of their own destiny. If they beat the Oregon Ducks, I do think that they would be able to sustain one conference loss in the Big Ten, and should they win the Big Ten, I think that they would qualify for the playoff. So yeah, they know it's a really big game. Now all that said, you know it, I know it, the players know it. The coaches are trying to waffle. The coaches are trying to say, well, this isn't an end-all, be-all. This isn't a make-or-break, because the worst thing that can happen for Michigan State is for them to lose this game and for them to lose their stinger. Now, they've got a couple weeks to get it back before Nebraska comes to Spartan Stadium to open the Big Ten season in October. But they're trying to avoid putting pressure on their guys. They want to be in a position where it's an opportunity game, where it's everything to gain and nothing to lose. And while that's a nice concept, I don't think anybody's buying that in East Lansing, and probably not in Eugene either.
We got one person who asked a question about what other Big Ten teams run an offense somewhat similar to Oregon's, like kind of spread. And Indiana is one that we've always heard about. Ohio State, obviously. I guess for folks who don't really watch Big Ten football that much, are there any other kind of comparisons to Oregon's offense that Michigan State would necessarily see throughout the year? Maybe Nebraska a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. I was going to say Nebraska. Nebraska really hurt Michigan State with Taylor Martinez a couple years ago. He rushed for over 200 yards against Michigan State, just absolutely carved them up. Now, I don't know if I believe that Marcus Mariota is as good a runner as he is. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. We're going to find out pretty soon. But mobile quarterbacks have given State trouble. Indiana's quarterback doesn't run as much, but they run a lot of the same spread and hurry-up attack. They've given Michigan State trouble. So this is nothing new. This is nothing Michigan State hasn't seen. Notre Dame runs a lot of 4 wides. Obviously, we talked about how they throw the ball deep and how we think Oregon's going to try and take their shots as well. But this isn't a matter of Michigan State having never seen what Oregon's going to do. I think the biggest difference is the level of talent that Oregon has and the speed at these positions and these running backs. These 3 running backs, they look like 3 Amir Abdullahs to me. Put Amir Abdullah and Melvin Gordon in the backfield at the same time, and that's what you've got. And we're going to see Michigan State's linebackers really put to the test when they're trying to tackle these guys out in space.
Speaking of mobile quarterbacks, I did have a question for you guys. One of the interesting things Mark D'Antonio, I thought, said this week about Marcus Mariota is that in their biggest games, he said he's seen them and not only rise to the challenge and play his best, but also maybe run a little bit more than pass. And just wondering your guys' take on that, if that's kind of a trend that you've seen as well.
You want to take that, Andrew?
Sure. Yeah. That's always what's made Oregon so dangerous. That offense is not only his ability to pass, and he can pass really well and really effectively. He's a career record holder at Oregon for completion percentage. But it's because he can run. He's unbelievable as a runner when he's healthy, and that's kind of the caveat. Because last year, for the final 2 months and change, he wasn't all the way healthy, and so that was a drastic change in the defense. Because from the defense's perspective, I should say, because they could kind of sit back and know he wasn't going to be the threat. He wasn't going to take off at a moment's notice. It's a big, big weapon. I mean, I think you have to just go back and look up on YouTube his third down against Virginia last year, his first quarter non-conference game this week on the road, second week of the season. Crowd was going crazy, and they did a design draw for him that went 70-plus yards, and he out-sprinted everybody. It was the run all the way. He executed it beautifully. It was perfect, and you don't do that with many other quarterbacks in this country who are as comfortable taking off for 70 yards as they are throwing for 70 yards. So it's a big deal when he can get loose and turn even a broken play into 5 yards, salvage a play like that. And when you give him that read option, you want to make a defense think, this could be Marcus, this could be the running back. When he's not healthy, they can pretty much, you eliminate one of those possibilities, and it really hurts Oregon's element of surprise.
Tell me more about Oregon's defense. I know we talked a little bit about their 3-4 look and how tall and athletic these guys are. Out of their front seven, how seasoned are they, and how effective are they against just a power run game? You mentioned Stanford last year.
Tyson, you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, that's kind of one of the things that they're kind of taking to heart this week, because for the last 2 years, kind of the knock on them has been when they match up against like Stanford's big offensive line in the past, like they've haven't been able to kind of match that power for power. And one of the matchups we're really looking forward on Saturday is Derek Malone, who's a relatively undersized Oregon inside linebacker against Michigan State's running game. I think the wording was it's definitely like a pride issue for them this week, because they've had, their offense has been so flashy the last 6-7 years, like so effective, but like the defense has that kind of chip on their shoulder of, when they're going against a team that can just play hard-nosed, ground up the middle football, they haven't been able to compete or contain it. During the Stanford game last year, how many consecutive 4-yard runs were there in a row where it was just, okay, we need to get a stop here, and then just 4-yard run. So I think that's definitely something. I know Andrew's seen this defense play more than I have. What are your thoughts on that?
It's just that I think that where they get hurt sometimes is the linebackers they have right now. They've acknowledged this, that their middle linebackers, Derek Malone and Rodney Hardrick, aren't quite the downhill running playmakers who the guys who preceded them. Kiko Alonso, of course, he's pretty good in the NFL last year as a rookie. Michael Clay, who was a terrific college linebacker who helped them get the Fiesta Bowl win 2013. I think that they need those guys. They're a little undersized to make some good tackles in the open field, because the defensive line has all the potential in the world. They're 6'7" and 6'8", and we've talked about this before with Mike. It's like they're a basketball team, but those linebackers have to make the stop in the open field, because that's where they get hurt. That's where any team gets hurt, but that's where Oregon traditionally has been really hurt, is just not coming up and making that play.
And they had some. If you can take issues out of a big win against South Dakota, was that was just it. Derek Malone had some trouble making tackles in the open field. It's kind of nitpicky at this point when you win 62-13 or whatever it was, but Michigan State's definitely going to be bringing in a much different animal than South Dakota did up the middle.
Yeah, I think so. Although I'll say this, Michigan State's running game I don't think looks as good as the last 2 years. And I mentioned the injury earlier. I thought they got pushed around a little bit by Jacksonville State, which isn't your typical FCS team. They had a few SEC transfers in their front seven, some pretty salty guys, and they were loading the box, but still, there were times I saw Michigan State's offensive line get pushed back a little bit. I think where Michigan State can really hurt Oregon is with their tight ends and with some of their intermediate routes. I also think Connor Cook's got the ability to pull it down. He hasn't yet. But Connor's a fast guy. He can scramble. We've kind of been waiting for, when that's finally going to happen. I know Mark D'Antonio's brought it up yet again this week. But State's got some really good slot receivers that they did not throw to against Jacksonville State. And they've got two pretty dangerous tight ends that can get loose as well. So I'd almost think that Michigan State's short, intermediate passing game could cause trouble for Oregon if the Ducks are too loaded up in the box. There's some speedy slots, and Kyle can tell you about some of those other receivers that haven't caught a pass yet that we're looking for big things from this season.
Yeah, you actually kind of answered a reader question we got, which was, what do we think Oregon will have the toughest time stopping as far as the Michigan State offense? And obviously, as you guys mentioned earlier, the Stanford comparison's been made that teams that have put up big rushing yards against Oregon kind of seem to be the blueprint, so to speak, quote unquote. But I really think that Michigan State will probably be turning somewhat to its passing game. Connor Cook looked amazing, all the Jacksonville State caveats, but he did look amazing in the opener. They've got, as Mike just mentioned, quite a few receivers that can do some big things. They go 6 to 7 deep there. So I really think that it'll be the passing game, more so than the running game, that'll probably give them trouble.
Is Langford all the way healthy? That's one thing I was trying to keep track of. Is he a threat to be all the way?
Well, we don't know that for sure. Michigan State closes their practices, and this week they've been even tighter. The way he was grabbing his ankle, I've got to wonder a little bit. And Langford's a guy that, Stanford did a pretty nice job shutting down. And again, I don't see Michigan State wearing teams down this season, maybe like they did last year in the fourth quarter with Langford and that offensive line. I'm kind of curious about the whole Michigan State running game as a whole, because after Langford, you got a fifth-year senior named Nick Hill, and, boy, that guy works as hard as he can work. I don't know what his upside is, but, the coach says he plays because he deserves to play, and that sounds great in a rec league, but, we're talking about a championship-level game here this Saturday. I don't know if you throw a guy out there that you don't think has really got that type of potential, and then, their third back is a guy by the name of Delton Williams who looked good in flashes last year, about 6'1", 225, but his dream is to play defense. And, I just don't know how great of a running back you can be if your heart's not really wanting to be on that side of the ball. Their fourth back's a guy they redshirted by the name of Gerald Holmes that I thought looked really good, but he was operating behind the second-team offensive line and really didn't have a whole lot of space. And then there's another guy that you may not even hear of that he's making the trip. He's a freshman named Madre London that signed with Michigan State out of St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale, where he was able to gain a lot of yards and break a lot of tackles against the best high school football in the country. And apparently he did the same thing in fall camp. But unlike Oregon, which is able to get these talented freshmen on the field, Michigan State's, they like guys to stand in line and wait, I guess. So they don't know if they can get him on the field because there's four other guys who deserve to be there. And, maybe on the plane ride back, if they lose this football game by less than a touchdown, they might be second-guessing themselves if they're not putting their best talent on the field.
What's the toughest, I would say, like stadium atmosphere Michigan State's seen over the last couple of years?
Wow. Nebraska is really loud and really unique. Nebraska fans are truly the nicest fans that you will meet anywhere. And, I say that having covered the SEC for 20 years. And it throws the players off. They cheer for the visitors when they make a good play. They encourage the visitors. They congratulate the visitors. And, these kids get used to coming into hostile environments and, being dog-cussed and having their mothers called out. And it serves to fire them up. I know for Michigan State, Michigan State's been pretty doggone good on the road and seems to really feed off that. Michigan State, you got to remember, this is a program that plays with a chip on its shoulder. And, just ask Michigan about the little brother comment. That was 7 years ago, and State still gets mileage out of that. So the more aggressive and insulting the Autzen Stadium crowd is, the better Michigan State will play. Nebraska, conversely, throws teams off with being pleasant and being polite fans. So I'd say, believe it or not, and they're loud when they need to be. But I would say Nebraska is probably the most difficult environment I've seen in the Big Ten over the last 2 years.
What you talked about, that 20 years in the SEC, around the SEC, what's the best atmosphere you've been in for a stadium?
It's Jordan-Hare Stadium for the Iron Bowl. There's nothing like Alabama-Auburn. Nothing compares to it. I covered some really great Florida-Tennessee games at the Swamp and Neyland Stadium. It's just not the same. I've covered just about every bowl game, national championship games. The Alabama-Auburn rivalry takes it to a whole nother level. It's almost spiritual. You can certainly feel it in the air. I know you've got your Civil War rivalry out here. Is that what they call it, the Uncivil War? I don't know what patch of land that they're fighting over, though. Me and Kyle drove by it yesterday, and we didn't see a whole lot worth fighting for between Corvallis and Eugene, but I know they sort it out every year. But it would probably be Jordan-Hare Stadium for the Alabama-Auburn games, probably the best environment I've seen.
I mean, there's some farm country over there. There's some land.
Well, I'm wondering, kind of along those lines, if you guys feel like the atmosphere at Autzen Stadium, I mean, it's so kind of overblown, for people that have never been there. It's been such a topic of conversation this week. Is it all it's cracked up to be, I guess, for Michigan State fans that are going to be there?
I think Tyson will have an interesting perspective on this, because last week was the first one he's ever actually covered in Autzen during a regular season game. So you kind of came into that with open eyes. What'd you think of that?
I mean, you always hear like how Autzon's so loud for how few people it sits. It sits. What was the sellout last week? Like 59?
Yeah, pretty close to.
Yeah, 59. So I mean, it was awfully loud. I think it was just kind of hard to get a good feel of it for when they're playing South Dakota. Because I mean, as pumped up as you can be for a season opening game, it's still South Dakota. But I mean, it was awfully impressive. But I come from. I went to school at Montana, which is an FCS school, and they said about 30. They pack about 30,000 in there, and they get pretty darn loud too. So like I'm used to like small crowds making big noise. So I mean, stadium atmosphere wise, I thought it was great, but I think Saturday is going to be kind of a different level, just in terms of the fans aren't stupid. They know there's a difference between last week's game and this week's game.
Yeah, Montana's got one of the most beautiful stadiums I've ever seen, by the way. If it were 3 times bigger, it'd be on par with any stadium in the country, but talk about just the aesthetics and the setting of where Montana Stadium is. And I'm not just saying that for Tyson's point of view. That really is one of the most beautiful stadiums in the country. Not sure if I would drive that far just to see it or go to a game there, but if you could put a nice picture of it, Tyson, maybe a video, that might impress some people. I see one of our questions, people want to know about how the SEC compares outside of the stadium. A lot of the reason that SEC football is so big is because there wasn't a whole lot of professional sports teams down south. When television really came into being and sports really started going across the country. I think before that, college football was largely a regional sport. That's why you see all these teams claiming national championships, and we're just now figuring out that 5 and 6 teams are claiming the same year's national titles. Some of those years in the 50s or the 60s. There were so many of them. But back then, there weren't a lot of pro sports teams down there. And there's been a lot of studies actually done on this. 1960s wasn't the best time for the South in terms of its image nationally, with a lot of the things that were going on in our country's equal rights movement. But one of the things that the people in the South could really grab a hold of was their football programs and how well they represented the South. And I know that in the case of Alabama, that was one of the reasons the people of Alabama really loved Alabama football, was it was something that the people there could be proud of at a very difficult time in that state, in that state's history. And then there's also people that say that this is a Civil War thing, that the South has never really gotten over losing the Civil War. And every Saturday they're fighting it out on the turf, and those Southern boys had better bring it home, particularly in the bowl games, because they got something to prove. They might have lost the war of the 1800s, but by God, they're going to beat you on Saturday in the college football fields. Now we all know that these programs recruit nationally, and it's not as regionalized as it once was. But I think those are the roots of why college football became so big in the South, and you hear about families passing down season tickets and wills and things like that. It's such a big social event. I think that's another thing. You come out here to the West Coast, and there's so many different things to do that college football gets lost. Really, any one sport gets lost because there's so many other things to do out west. In the South, there's not. There's college football, and there's hard work. And that's the way it was in the 1960s and the 70s, and I think that there's a lot of tradition to that, and I think they're very proud of that. And it's become a part of the social fabric. Even if you see the way women dress up for games down south, it doesn't look like they're going to a football game. A lot of times it looks like they're going to a ball.
Yeah. What do you guys think about maybe one of the last things we touch on? I mean, this is a top 10 game, the first top 10 game in Autzen Stadium history. Obviously a very big deal. The line is 12 points, and it's kind of gone back and forth. Sometimes it's 14, sometimes 11, but it's in that 2-touchdown range. Are you guys surprised by that, considering this is for all it's been blown up to be, one of the best games of the entire season to be that wide? It seems wide for me anyway. I don't know.
I was a little surprised by it, to be honest with you. I don't think it was huge, and I think Vegas, frankly, knows a lot more than I do about things like this. But I think there's a lot to be said with flying all the way across the country early in the season, dealing with the environment, everything. I think that's more than the typical 3 points that Vegas gives for a home game. And kind of the clash of styles, I think it's kind of hard to predict. So it was a little higher than I thought. If I'm making a pick, which I'll throw it out there, I'll pick Oregon to win, but I don't pick them by a touchdown or so, maybe 42-35 or something like that.
I think I was surprised by the opening line last summer when it came out at 13 or 14 points. It seemed a bit high to me, even knowing that the objective for Las Vegas is to try and get equal money bet on both sides. But you look at Oregon's track record, and they've beaten some really good teams by 21, 28 points, and because of the style of play that Oregon goes with, games can get out of hand fast. It can be a 3-touchdown game in 3 or 4 minutes. So in that sense, I kind of understand it. I'm picking Michigan State to pull the upset. I've only seen that one Oregon game. I didn't get to see a lot of it. I was watching on the internet via satellite. But I wasn't as impressed with Oregon's passing game as I thought I would be, particularly the downfield game. I think if you're going to hurt Michigan State, you got to be able to show that you can hurt them deep with the deep ball. I don't know if Oregon's got the receivers to do that. I think Marcus Mariota can throw the deep ball, but I'm not sure that Oregon's got those receivers on the perimeter to do that. Those running backs look like the most dangerous component to me. It's almost strength on strength when you look at Oregon's running backs and running game against Michigan State's front seven, and I don't know how that's going to go. I mean, that could be close to even, or one team could be a little bit better, and that could make all the difference in the world. But, Andrew and I talked about this earlier this week, and I mean, honestly, nothing would surprise me, guys. If either one of these teams won by 2 touchdowns, I wouldn't be shocked.
Cool. I think that I just wrap this up here. That was pretty cool. I don't know. I had fun. Got some good questions from folks. So I don't know. From my living room, I guess I would say thanks for joining us. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know. That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
See you guys on the courtyard here at the Marriott, where are we? Springfield, Oregon, Mike. I say thank you for joining us too. mlive.com/Spartans for everything Michigan State.
And OregonLive.com/Ducks for all things Ducks.